because this is where I start configuring on which uplink on the server. Remember that VIC1240 with those multiple uplinks? This is the place where I start configuring that. How do I want to position the VNICs and VHBAs on different uplinks, on different cards even? Manually, it's going to do it in order how you configured them. So you see that I first configured FC0, then FC1, then VNIC0. That's exactly the order that I used to configure the template. So that's usually not what I want, right? I want to have a little bit more control over that. So I want to use a manual specification. And here I have the option to manually specify VHBAs and VNICs into those V connectivity groups. As you can see here, 4 VCon groups for when going back to our drawing. When I have my VIC1280 and the VIC1240 in the server, I have a path A and B here. I have a second A and B path. I have a third A and B path and a fourth A and B path. And this is going to be VCon 4, VCon 3. Actually, do not pay attention to the numbers because they will be a little bit different. But this is my 4 VCon groups. And that's how that's mapped here to those 4 VCon groups. So here I'm going to say, I know that my VNIC 0 and VNIC 1 are going to be separated on A and B, right? That's VNIC 0 is going to use A, VNIC 1 is going to use B. So I can place them both in VCon 1. Why? I have 10 gig left, 10 gig right in one VCon group. Now my VNIC 2, remember, that is the failover VNIC. That is running the DMZ VLANs. That failover VNIC is primarily using Fabric A, but in case of failure, Fabric B. So I want to use different bandwidth for that. Now on my Palo card that I have in the actual server, I only have one link, right? Only 1 gig, 10 gig left, 10 gig right. But the lab might ask you to configure this placement by thinking that you have this in your server, this VIC1240, VIC1280. They can ask you to think about this and let you configure this. So then I say, all right, because that DMZ VLAN needs separate bandwidth, I need to place it into a different VCon group. So let's do that. No, that's wrong. VCon 2, assign VNIC 2. Then I need to position my fiber channel interfaces. That's what I'm going to do in VCon 3. Because of course my VHBAs are going to consume bandwidth as well. So now I perfectly positioned all of the traffic into different connectivity groups without any oversubscription. Well, of course I do have oversubscription because I do not have this particular configuration. But if I would have these cards, then the VHBAs are here, HBA1 and HBA2, so FC0 and FC1. Then VNIC 0 and VNIC 1 would be here on the red VCon, and VNIC 2 would float between these two links because it is set for failover. So without any oversubscription, I now configured my B200M3 server. We move on. How do I want to boot the server? Well, I configured a fiber channel boot policy, right? So let's use that. Don't need to do anything else because the targets is already filled in. The name of the VHBA I already specified. So I'm good to go in terms of fiber channel booting. Next step, maintenance policy. Do I want to use the default? So if I select the default policy here, it means I'm going to reboot immediately as soon as I change something. So you're still lost with the V connectivity group. How can I make that better for you? So one more time. I have the following blade. In that blade, I have that VIC-1240 and the VIC-1280. Well, in the lab, we will have the M81KR and potentially the VIC-1240. The VIC-1240 is only possible on the M3 blade, but potentially this can be in there. This is going to be there for sure, 100% sure. This is doubtful. In my lab, I only have the M81KR. But like I said, even when you only have this hardware, I can still provision things into different VCon groups. So in the end, in the hardware, it's gonna look differently, but on the configuration, I can still get questions about this. And that means that they can ask you that in the future, a server will be added with the VIC-1240 and 1280. So you need to prepare your networking configuration accordingly. That's what they can ask you, right? So my current servers all have that M81KR, but my future servers that are going to use the same service profile template will have this. And then I need to make sure that I'm not oversubscribing any interface. Do I have to assign vCons? No, you do not need to assign them. So I can just leave it to automatically assign. So automatically assigning is just okay as well. How many vCons does the M81KR has? Just one. It has 10 gig left, 10 gig right. 10 gig left, 10 gig right combined is a vCon. So 10 gig left, 10 gig right is my vCon. So on the M81KR, I only have one vCon. Now the difference is, what if I have a full width blade? If I have a B250 M2, that is a full width blade that supports a lot of memory. In that blade, I can fit 2 Palo cards. That means vCon 1 and vCon 2. So even in an M81KR, in a full width blade, I can have 2 vCon groups. The only place when I have 4 vCons is with this, with a VIC-1240 and a VIC-1280, or the port expander. Same thing. So the question in the lab might tell you, I have VNIC 0, VNIC 1, VNIC 2 that has failover enabled, and I have FC0 and FC1. So I have 5 VNICs, technically 6, because I have failover enabled. That's exactly how I configured it, right? So VNIC 0 is using Fabric A, this one is using Fabric B, the failover is using both, this one is using A, this one is using B. Make sure that in a VIC-1240 and VIC-1280 server that we're going to insert in the future, it's not going to oversubscribe any of the internal connections. Then I need to do this. So with that placement policy, when I specify this manually now, I specify that VNIC 0 and VNIC 1 into vCon group 1, because VNIC 0 is using path A, so that can go left here. VNIC 1 is using B, so that can use this path over here. So that's not oversubscribed. VNIC 2 is enabled for failover. So in the first place, it's going to use Fabric A, but if I have a failure, it's going to use Fabric B. So again, I need to place these VNIC 2, I'm going to place that into a different vCon, so I do not oversubscribe the links in vCon 1. Then finally, I have my VHBAs, and also these are going to consume traffic on the Ethernet link. So that's also something that I need to place in another vCon group. And now I have a fully non-oversubscribed situation, where everything is placed into different connectivity groups and therefore using different Ethernet links. So these links here that I draw here are the links between the blade and the FEX, right? So these are connections from the blade going to the internal port on the FEX. In my case, I just have a half-width blade with one Palo card. That means that technically everything will end up in the same vCon group. The card that I have is an M81KR, so only one vCon. So that means that in my case, vCon 1, vCon 2, vCon 3, and vCon 4 are all on the same link, right? I can still use this configuration. But in the end, this is only 1 times 10 gig. I can use the same service profile template on different sets of hardware. So I can have an older server and a newer server using the same service profile template. That is why I support this. That is why I support either the spreading of vCon groups or putting them all together under one link. So when I apply this to my hardware, everything will end up using the same link. But when I'm reapplying this service profile to a newer blade, it's going to automatically spread the links. And that has to do with how I position the NICs on the PCI bus as well.